was able to steer two headstrong adversaries away from the brink of war by persuading the U.S. and North Korea to come to the negotiating table and to put denuclearization back on the agenda. But this is only the beginning, as there are still a number of obstacles to overcome for the face-to-face meeting between U.S. President Donald Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un to actually take place. There are also concerns that if the negotiations fail, we may, in the worst-case scenario, see the two sides choosing the military force option. And before we sit down with an expert to talk more about this, let's first get a quick check on what's making the news at this hour with our Devin Whiting at the News Center. Hello, Devin.
Hi, June. Well, there's a lot to sort out in planning the landmark summit between President Trump and Kim Jong-un, not least choosing a venue for the talks. The White House isn't ruling out Washington or even Pyongyang, but many think it'll happen in a third country, South Korea being the most likely. Kim Yo-san explains.
With President Trump agreeing to meet North Korean leader Kim Jong-un face-to-face by May, the possible location of the summit is garnering much attention. Kim could be traveling to Washington, according to White House Deputy Press Secretary Raj Shah, who explained to American broadcaster ABC that no location is being ruled out. Although it's not considered likely, he also said President Trump could even fly to Pyongyang for the summit, adding that the time and place need to be decided. Meanwhile, an official at South Korea's presidential office said on Sunday that the joint security area of Panmunjom, located on the demarcation line separating the two Koreas, is one of the likely venues for the summit. The official told reporters that Panmunjom, where the leaders of the two Koreas will meet next month, would hold a significant meaning, as Washington and Pyongyang are the directly involved parties of the truce agreement on the Korean peninsula. The New York Times also reports that Panmunjom could play host to the landmark summit. Kim Yo-san, Arirang News.
And those historic talks will be front and center again later this week in Washington. South Korea's Foreign Minister Kang will be meeting on Thursday with U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson to discuss how to go about holding them. She'll be there for 3 days. South Korea's foreign ministry says they'll also talk about the allies' economic and trade relations, including the U.S. steel and aluminum tariffs that are set to take effect 2 weeks from now. Kang is also set to meet with other senior Washington officials, and preparing for those meetings will be Seoul's nuclear envoy, Lee Do-hun, who will arrive in Washington a day ahead of Kang. China's rubber-stamped legislature, the National People's Congress, has passed a constitutional amendment abolishing the presidential term limit, which will effectively allow President Xi Jinping to remain in power indefinitely. The virtually unanimous vote is now centralized power in China to a degree not seen in a generation. Noah reports.
Sunday's vote by China's rubber-stamp parliament removes a system enacted by former Chinese leader Deng Xiaoping in 1982. That was aimed at preventing a Mao Zedong-type cult of personality and the dangers of one-man rule. President Xi has already been hailed as the most powerful leader since Mao, but now it's official. He had claimed that the constitutional changes were what the Chinese people and party wanted. Although most of the public favor the move as providing stability and allowing President Xi time to see through his agenda of fighting corruption and ending poverty, others are more wary. Some critics suggest it could make President Xi politically vulnerable in the long run. Those concerns are mostly based on the fact that during the era of Mao Zedong, many poor decisions were made due to vicious infighting within the Communist Party. Others are concerned about a return to increased political repression throughout the country, which has already become apparent. Any comments on social media expressing opposition to Sunday's move have been scrapped by China's censored internet, and critics say they have been pressured by the government to stay silent. As well as a tighter grip on power, Xi has long promoted a strong military and has made rapid advancements to his armed forces. That, along with the prospect of a lifelong Xi leadership, could see other countries on edge, as it could allow him to act more aggressively on China's territorial claim in the South China Sea. Although Xi is China's unrivaled leader, the presidency is merely a symbolic position, and the real power lies with the head of the Communist Party. The next few years could see the emergence of Chairman Xi, which will solidify his grip on power even further. Noah Arirang News.
South Korea has vowed to use all possible means to counter the impact of America's new tariffs on steel and other restrictions on Korean products. There's also the issue of the Trans-Pacific Trade Deal to replace the TPP. That's the CPTPP. Around a dozen countries, minus the U.S., will be joining it, and the South Korean government says it'll decide by June whether to sign up. Kim Ji-yeon reports.
Finance Minister Kim Dong-yeon touched upon various trade-related issues at an economic ministerial level meeting on Monday, in particular to those stemming from rising U.S. trade protectionist measures on imported steel and other Korean products, including washing machines and solar panels. He vowed to use all possible means to counter its adverse impact, saying there's a high chance similar measures could be implemented by other countries.
I've sent a letter to U.S. Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin asking him to exclude Korean steel from the U.S. safeguard duties. I've also scheduled a one-on-one meeting with him on the sidelines of next week's G20 finance ministers meeting in Argentina to discuss a wide range of issues related to bilateral trade.
Kim added that growing fears of a global trade war come amid moves to normalize interest rates by major countries due to a possible U.S. interest rate hike scheduled for later this month. As one countermeasure, Kim said the government will be diversifying the country's trade routes, and with this in mind, the government will be finalizing by June on whether South Korea will be signing the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership. The deal is a mega free trade pact signed by 11 former members of the TPP after the U.S. withdrew in January 2017. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
South Korea's chronically low birth rate is no longer reflected just in the number of babies in the country. Its effects are rising up through the age groups. Elementary schools have fewer students, and some have had to close down. A few days ago, that happened for the first time in Seoul, a city home to more than 20 million people. Cha Sang-mi has this story.
Saturday marks the 53rd anniversary of the opening of Eunhae Elementary School. But even before the celebration takes place, the history of the school technically ended on Tuesday as the parents of the last few remaining students decided to transfer their kids to other schools. The silence is deafening in an otherwise ordinary-looking schoolyard. Eunhae Elementary School in Seoul's northwestern Eunpyeonggu district is the first elementary school in the capital to shut due to the ongoing plunge in the number of students. Just looking at Seoul, the number of elementary school students has plummeted nearly 45% over the last 17 years, from 755,000 to a mere 428,000. An expert on demographics says one or two married couples deciding not to have kids can be an individual problem, but when the trend is rampant and spreading, it becomes a grave social issue. More and more couples in Korea are giving up on the idea of having kids, put off by the spiraling cost of raising children. Statistics Korea reported this month that Korea's total fertility rate, the average number of children born to a woman aged between 15 and 49 over her lifetime, fell to just 1.05 as of last year. That's one of the lowest rates in the world. The expert identified high educational expenses in Korea as the main factor behind the trend. Korea's chronically low birth rate and its rapidly aging population are two issues that are closely intertwined. Fewer babies mean fewer people of working age who will end up contributing to the economy. As the population ages, the expert says Korea's growth engine is steadily eroding away.
There are two ways to tackle it. First, the government can provide benefits to married couples starting a family. The other option is to allow workers from other countries to move here. However, the way they are treated and their working conditions should be considered carefully.
With the first elementary school closing in Seoul, the expert predicts more schools will be forced to shut in the coming years. In few years down the line, it's likely universities will also share the same fate. Cha Sang-mi, Arirang News.
I'm Devin Whiting, and those are your news headlines for this hour.
First First, they visited North Korea, then the U.S. And now South Korea's special envoys are visiting China, Japan, and Russia. They'll be briefing the leaders of those countries on the outcomes of their visit to Pyongyang. Our Blue House correspondent Hwang Ho-jun has more.
Less than 24 hours since the special envoys came back from their trip to Washington and their meeting with President Trump, they were heading off again, this time separately. President Moon's top security advisor Jung Eui-yong arrived in Beijing Monday morning to meet with Chinese President Xi Jinping and other officials. After 2 days in China, Jung will fly to Moscow, but because there's a presidential election in Russia on Sunday, it hasn't been confirmed whether he'll be able to meet with President Vladimir Putin. Meanwhile, the head of South Korea's intelligence agency Seo Hoon arrived in Tokyo Monday afternoon and will meet with Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe on Tuesday. The special envoys will be explaining to each leader the outcomes of their historic visit to Pyongyang, as they did to President Trump. That will include the details of North Korean leader Kim Jong-un's promise to return to the negotiation table, his willingness to discuss denuclearization in exchange for security guarantees, his commitment to stop nuclear and missile testing, and his acceptance of plans by South Korea and the U.S. to continue their joint military exercises. The envoys will also discuss the much-anticipated inter-Korean summit that will take place in April. Chung In-seo will also explain the results of their visit to Washington, where President Trump agreed to meet with Kim Jong-un by May if North Korea makes good on its recent commitments. The visits by Chung In-seo to China, Russia, and Japan is seen as an effort by the Moon administration to guarantee the smooth implementation of the inter-Korean agreement and to eventually find a solution to the North Korean nuclear issue, since those countries' active cooperation and support will be key. Hwang Ho-jun, Arirang News.
And to talk with us more about President Moon's role in orchestrating the potential meeting between U.S. President Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, Dr. Woo Jung-yup, a research fellow at the Sejong Institute, joins us in the studio today. So good to see you.
Thank you for having me today.
So many reports have been giving credit to President Moon for setting up this potential meeting between Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un, even saying that this was an impressive accomplishment for the South Korean president, given that the two sides have even traded threats of war for months up until now. So how would you assess President Moon's diplomacy up until now?
Though it is believed that the combination of effects led North Korea to come to the table for the denuclearization discussions. But it is also believed by many observers that President Moon's effort should be acknowledged. First, President Moon and South Korean government has been very firm on its stance on pressuring North Korea. And second, but at the same time, South Korea welcomes the possible dialogue with North Korea and tries to enhance inter-Korean relations to build trust between two Koreas. And thirdly, and South Korean government is very good at coordinating with the United States in North Korean policies. So all those three effects have been successful in making this summit, possible summit between the United States and North Korea.
It looks like persistency by President Moon was the key in all this.
Yes, he has been open for dialogue, but at the same time, he's been firm on the stance of pressuring North Korea until it is ready for the discussion with the international community for denuclearization of North Korea.
Now, it's going to be quite busy for the Blue House as it gets ready for that inter-Korean summit coming up in April, as well as a potential U.S. North Korea summit by May.
Yes, as President Moon mentioned, that it's like walking over very thin ice to realize the possible summit between South Korea and North Korea, and also the United States and North Korea. And there are a lot of things have to be pre-coordinated before the summit, because it is usually that summit is not discussing all the things.
Right.
It's usually for celebrating the deals that they made before the summit. So like we have like less than 2 months now. So with White House, Blue House, and the North Korea is going to be very busy, and South Korea is the hub for the works to be done by the May.
Now there's also interest over where the potential summit between Mr. Trump and Mr. Kim may be held. So do we have an outlook on that?
As Kim Jong-un invited President Trump, so there was a discussion about the possibility of having a meeting at Pyongyang. But for the United States, for the security reasons, it's very difficult for them to make a presidential visit. Also, it's difficult for Pyongyang to accept international media open to broadcast all those things by U.S. presidential visit. And it is also still possible that Kim Jong-un can visit Washington.
Okay.
But Kim Jong-un has never left North Korea. So I think it's still very unlikely that he's going to leave North Korea to have a meeting with a foreign leader. So I think that Panmunjom Joint Security Area might be the place for two countries can have interest because it's easier for each country to secure the presidential security and leaders' security, and they don't. And this meeting is not about like having like state dinner or celebrating.
Right.
It's more of like working summit. So I think Panmunjom might be enough for them to have meeting this time.
So, and even before this possible summit, potentially they're going to be sending working level and high level officials to one another to talk about what's going to be talked about at the summit.
Yes, even though South Korean government relayed the message from Kim Jong-un to President Trump, North Korea has not directly contacted yet with the United States government.
Okay.
So first, the United States requires North Korea to contact them directly and show to the United States that North Korea is really interested in talks about denuclearization. So the working level meeting has to be there before the summit.
All right. So a big step forward was made as President Moon persuaded Trump and Kim Jong-un to come to talks. But at the same time, still, there are some of the things that Mr. Moon should be aware of in dealing with Trump and Kim Jong-un before the summit actually happens.
U.S. government believe that the North Korea's changing behavior is only possible from its global maximum pressure. And U.S. government also mentioned that the North Korea's words should be matched by concrete actions. So United States is going to be very hard on North Korea on the discussion terms. And so I think that North Korea might defect from the discussion if U.S. push too hard. So South Korean government's role is to mediating between two parties, so no parties will be defecting from the discussion.
So no parties go over the line.
Right.
Okay. Well, now Mr. President Moon is now in the driver's seat, obviously, trying to resolve this standoff between the two countries. Now, other countries have been reacting to this news as well. And what's interesting is that China and Russia have actually welcomed this news, and they are the two countries that are closest to North Korea. So tell us more about their reaction.
Yes, China and Russia are two countries, are member countries of the Sixparty talks before, and two countries have been very supportive of talks over any other measures to denuclearize North Korea. So with the heightened military tensions over the Korean Peninsula in past 2 years, China and Russia welcomed the possible summit between two Koreas and also between the United States and North Korea, because now it's one step closer to the peaceful denuclearization of Korean Peninsula.
Right. How about Japan then? I mean, how has Japan reacted and responded to this latest development?
As it is reported that President Trump agreed to have a summit with President Kim Jong-un, the first thing from Japan was that President Abe is going to meet President Trump before April is done. Because the worst scenario that Japan has is that the United States is made a deal with North Korea on freeze, not denuclearization. Because freeze leaves Japan very vulnerable to North Korea's nuclear weapons. So Japan wants to check whether U.S. is going for denuclearization or freeze.
Now, some experts say that our neighboring countries like China and Japan seem to be concerned about the so-called China passing and Japan passing, in which South Korea and the U.S. may exclude China and Japan when it comes to talks over North Korea policy.
I think the U.S. government also knows the concern by those neighboring countries. That is why President Trump contacted Xi Jinping, the Chinese leader, and also Prime Minister Abe of Japan to consult with the future process of dealing with North Korea. And from the past experience that it's not going to be just a bilateral discussion between North Korea and the United States, or the neighboring countries has to be involved. So United States needs China and Japan to successfully implement the denuclearization agreement with North Korea.
So on the surface, it kind of seems like that, but at the same time, we're kind of wondering, I mean, China did welcome this news, right? But at the same time, wouldn't China feel kind of uneasy about all this because they were trying to take over kind of U.S.'s position when it comes to the global leader, because U.S. has been kind of implementing global protectionism measures, and so China was trying to kind of look over that place. But now the silence or the standoff has been kind of broken between North Korea and the U.S. So in a way, I feel like China does welcome it officially, but in the end, I feel like they're a little bit uneasy right now.
Yes, it is true that China has been cooperating with the United States on pressuring North Korea, but China still needs North Korea for their strategic calculation. So China, at the same time, wants North Korea to be denuclearized, but China also does not want North Korea to be too close to the United States for their strategic reason. So with China does not involve heavily on the process of denuclearization of North Korea, China have concerns that U.S. and North Korea relation is improved while China-North Korea relations is going down. So because it's important for international community to be involved in the process of denuclearization.
So kind of going along with that, what are the chances of us seeing the resumption of the Sixparty nuclear talks?
So now we have to remind the September 19 agreement in 2005, when the Sixparty talks was still there. And that Sixparty talks produced the joint agreement to have verifiable denuclearization of North Korea, but at the same time, it guarantees the security of North Korea. So now North Korea will not be satisfied with only words from the United States. So the Sixparty talks members, especially China and Russia, can be a guarantor of North Korea's security against United States. So Sixparty talks is still very useful for North Korea and the United States, because now implementation should be international efforts. U.S. cannot alone deal with it. So once the United States and North Korea reach the agreement on denuclearization, now the Sixparty talks can resume to talk about the implementation process.
Okay, so President Moon was able to bring the two sides together to at least agree on having talks. But there are still some risks, though, because considering that if talks do fail, then the Korean Peninsula might face the risk of a military conflict again. And so with that in mind, what are some of the tasks remaining for President Moon as well as the South Korean government in dealing with the two countries before the summit actually happens?
So it depends on how we are going to define success. But I would like to define success as the successful denuclearization of North Korea this time. So United States will be firm on North Korea until that they can guarantee the denuclearization of North Korea. So United States not going to give out anything if North Korea is not denuclearizing itself.
Right.
So I think it's a South Korean government's role to continuing persuading North Korea to be sincerely approaching the denuclearization talks with the United States and international community. So if North Korea is again defecting from the agreement and the implementation of denuclearization talks, we are going to face a very serious risk on Korean Peninsula. That is why South Korean government role is very important to persuade North Korea to be sincere on denuclearization talks with the international community.
A mediator with very heavy shoulders, right?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much for your insight today.
Thank you.
And that brings us to the end of our show, but stay tuned to Arirang for more news updates throughout the day. As always, thank you for watching and goodbye.